What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one I'm going to be reacting to some of the price reveals that have happened since yesterday's live stream. So the way FPL are doing it right now is releasing 4 players from each club, and presumably once they've gone through every single club they will then go and launch the game. Now at the time of recording we've had about 12 or 13 teams, so if they do a few more on Tuesday there's not going to be a huge amount left for Wednesday, so I'm hoping the game will launch on Wednesday. I'm not going to go through every single price reveal in this video, just the most interesting ones to us when we're looking to build our Game Week 1 squads, and anything else I can cover in the live stream once the game launches, then first draft video, and then all the other content that's going to come throughout pre-season. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's jump into it. So let's start off with Liverpool and Chelsea. We saw in the live stream yesterday that Salah is priced at 12.5 million, listed as a midfielder, and Nkunku for Chelsea is 7.5 million forward. We've had another 4 players from each team. The one player that really stands out to me is Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's gone up to £8 million. Now, I thought last season he should have started at 8 million. He was actually 7.5, and he had one of his worst seasons. So some people are wondering why they've suddenly put him up, and I kind of get it, but he is an £8 million player. If you look at the last 5 seasons at Liverpool, he's averaged 183.8 points per season. So if I told you right now he's going to get another 183 points, he's absolutely worth 8 million. So I think that's completely fair, and the thing I like about it is it creates some discussion, because at 7.5 million, most people that were going to include him anyway would still continue to do that, but just that 0.5 million increase gives you something to consider, and there will be some people that are put off by that. My initial thinking right now is I'll still include him. Obviously I'll have to wait and see what everyone else's prices are, but I think given that he's kind of playing this role where he's moving into midfield and Liverpool are playing with 3 other kind of centre-backs, I think that £8 million price point is still going to be more than fair. So I like it. Robertson is 1.5 million cheaper. Now, if this was 2 or 3 seasons ago, you'd absolutely just buy Robertson instead, because they were both very attacking, plenty of potential for goals, assists, etc. But if Robertson is going to play as the left centre-back, that's not quite the case, in which case I would probably just pay that 1.5 million more. It's going to be interesting to see what price the other defenders come in at, like Van Dijk, for example. Will he be 6.5 like Robertson, or will he be 6? Maybe even 5.5 like Luke Shaw, Chilwell and James that we're going to come on to in a minute. There might be some discussion to kind of look at Van Dijk, but I'm not sure it's going to be instead of Trent Alexander-Arnold. But let's see what happens later on. Elsewhere, you've got McAllister at 6 million. I don't think he's going to get penalties off of Salah. That might be value at some point, but I think with Liverpool, you're always looking at the kind of Trent, the Robertsons, maybe like one of the attackers outside of Salah, and of course Salah himself. So using a second or third Liverpool spot on McAllister, I'm not quite sure that's going to be worth it initially, but let's see how they start playing. At some point that might be an absolute bargain. And talking of bargains, Nunez at 7.5, I really like that price point. I know at the end of last season he wasn't getting a huge amount of minutes. Everyone just assumes that going into this season Gakpo will absolutely just be the number 9, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think Nunez has now got a year under his belt under Klopp and Liverpool, another pre-season to go through. He was obviously very expensive when he came in last year as well. There will be a time, maybe it's not straight away, but there will be a time when he gets good amount of minutes, and 7.5 million is going to be a lot of teams. I don't know whether I'll start with him unless there's a lot of injuries to their other attackers, but I do like that price point. It's way more enticing than I think the 9 million he started at last year. With Chelsea, I'm going to be like a broken record, same as last year. You know how much I love, if you've watched my videos before, you know how much I love James and Chilwell. And yes, under Pochettino, they're probably going to play in a back 4 rather than as wing backs. But at 5.5 million, if they can stay fit, I really like both of them. I'm not sure I'd start with both. I might go for one or even none. Who knows? But Chelsea's fixtures are quite nice to open the season. And yes, they were awful last year, but I'm expecting a lot of improvement under Pochettino. And we know what those two players are capable of. And they got no European matches or anything like that this season whatsoever. It's just concentrating on the league and then, of course, the FA Cup and League Cup later on. So I'm really interested in Chelsea. I think there's going to be a lot of value there. In terms of Mudryk, I don't know. I'm not really massively interested in him. I'm not even convinced he's a great player. We'll have to wait and see if he can show a bit more this season. But Sterling at 7 million should be of interest to most of us. I know he didn't really do it last year, maybe not the season before either, but we know what he's capable of, and you would presume, looking at the Chelsea squad, he's probably going to be the first choice for that left wing spot unless they go and sign some other players. They're signing quite a few young players as well, but I think Sterling is likely to start the season. And for 7 million, he is the kind of player that can go and get you points as if he was priced at kind of 9, 10, maybe even 11 million. Maybe not quite that far, but he can get more points than that £7 million price tag would suggest. So looking at the player price reveals we've had so far, I feel like we're going to want a lot of midfielders. I think 3-5-2 is going to be quite popular. And it's not going to be about getting the value plays. It's going to be about deciding which ones to leave out. Yesterday, everybody wanted Fernandes. Odegaard looked good. Son was brilliant. Some people want to start with Salah. Now we've got Sterling at 7 million, Matoma 6.5, etc. Loads of midfielders to choose from. So it gives us something to think about. It doesn't mean that players like Sterling are absolute must-haves at 7 million, but they're definitely worth considering. So that's Liverpool and Chelsea. So next up, we've got Man United and Newcastle United. We saw on the stream yesterday that Bruno Fernandes is coming at 8.5 million, which a lot of people think is too cheap. I do agree that he probably could be a little bit more expensive, like 9 or 9.5, but I think it is a good idea to have brought him down from the 10 million he was last season, because most people only went for him when there was like a double game week or something like that. At least at 8.5 million, you can maybe consider him a bit more outside of that. So I quite like the price point, but I do agree he probably could be a bit more expensive. With Newcastle, it was Trippier that they released yesterday, 6.5 million. I think with the fixtures that Newcastle have got, that's probably going to be a bit too expensive for me to start with, but I think he had to be that kind of price given the points he got last year. He was so consistent for most of the season. We've already seen Newcastle kind of strengthen with Tonali coming in as well. So fair price point for Trippier. Not sure that I'm going to be starting with him. With the rest of the Man United players, Dalot is coming at 5 million. Luke Shaw is 5.5. That difference in price makes sense because Luke Shaw is basically nailed on. You expect him to start pretty much every single league game. Whereas with the right back position, Wan-Bissaka did get quite a few minutes, especially towards the end of last season. Now, I personally think with the squad that Man United currently have, if you're thinking about their best 11, I do think it includes Dalot because he's better on the ball, better going forward. But as we've seen, Wan-Bissaka will take minutes off him, so he's probably going to be too risky to start the season. And instead, you should just spend that 0.5 million on Luke Shaw instead. Obviously, there's quite a few other defenders that have already been announced that are also 5.5, like James and Chilwell that we already spoke about. If you told me right now, Luke Shaw, Ben Chilwell, Reece James, they're all going to stay fit and they're all going to play the first 10 to 15 games, I probably would be slightly more leaning towards going for the Chelsea players because of their attacking potential. But to be honest with you, Luke Shaw was so consistent last year in terms of starts. He does have a bit of attacking threat as well on some set pieces. I think right now he would probably be considered the slightly safer choice. With Sancho, 7 million, no one's really going to be that interested in him. His minutes aren't guaranteed. Hasn't really played well in a Man United shirt that often. There have been some games where it's happened, and he does have the quality to show more, but I think most people are going to want to see that before they commit. So 7 million, a good price point at some point, but probably not for game week 1. And then Rashford has come in 0.5 million more than Fernandes, which is probably fair. He went through a period last year where he couldn't stop scoring, but obviously Fernandes does have penalties. So again, a bit like the Trent Alexander-Arnold price of 8 million, which is going to create some discussion, I think most people will go straight to Rashford, but maybe there is a consideration there to go for Fernandes instead, save yourself 0.5 million, just hope that he gets a few penalties as well. There is obviously going to be lots of stuff to look at in pre-season. Does Bruno Fernandes drop a little bit deeper? Does Mason Mount push up instead? All those things to be considered before we lock any decisions in. But right now, I would probably go Rashford. But Fernandes for 0.5 million less might be the one worth looking at. I think Bruno Guimaraes and Joe Linton at 6 million, probably not players we're going to consider unless they continue to play in kind of more attacking roles or something like that. Isak at 7.5 million, that's another forward to add to that price bracket. I do think sometimes when I'm building my Game Week 1 drafts, I like to have a route to go to in case the player that I've got is not, gets injured or just isn't performing. So if you started with Isak, for example, there's kind of Mitrovic or Nkunku or Nunez to move onto instead at that same price point. So that does feel like it's going to be a forward position worth looking at. Again, I don't really rate Newcastle's fixtures that much. And if they continue to play with Wilson up front and Isak on the left, as we saw towards the end of last season, I won't be interested in Isak at all. And it'll also be worth seeing, will Wilson be 0.5 million more? I think he might be. I think Wilson will come in at 8 million just because of how much better he did towards the end of last season and the fact he's on penalties as well. So again, a little bit of conversation to be had there. I think most people will probably just go for Wilson if they're going to go for a Newcastle attacker, but let's see what price he comes in at. And then Botman is 4.5. That to me feels very cheap, considering Trippier is 6.5 million. Now, with Robertson and Trent, I would pay that 1.5 million more, but unless Newcastle's fixtures were like excellent, where I thought Trippier was going to get a bunch of attacking returns, I think in most cases I would just save the 2 million. I want to be cautious about what I say. People always remember what you say, like you can never change your mind. And I'm sure Trippier will be in my thinking at some point, but is he worth 2 million more than Botman? I think that's a little bit of a hard sell. We'll have to wait and see what share comes in at as well. I think he'll be 5 million. He also has attacking threat off set pieces, so he might be worth paying 1.5 million less than Trippier. So I think lots of things are kind of conspiring against Trippier. The other defenders in the team are way cheaper, or they look to be anyway. We'll see what share is. But also obviously fixtures as well is probably going to push us elsewhere. So that's Man United and Newcastle. Who do you think are the best options from those two teams that we've seen so far? And then we've got West Ham and Brighton. And I think with West Ham, they're definitely going to be a wait and see for me. They're about to lose one of their key players in Declan Rice. At the time recording, that transfer hasn't yet gone through, but it looks very likely that he's going to sign for Arsenal and be playing for them instead next year. And look, West Ham might cope perfectly well without Rice in the team, but when you couple that with the fixtures they have, none of those prices that have been revealed really scream must-have for game week 1. So they got Bournemouth away in game week 1 and Luton away in game week 4, which are pretty good fixtures. But outside of that, if you look at the first 6 games that West Ham have, it also includes Chelsea at home, Brighton away, Man City at home, and Liverpool away. So even Bowen at 7 million, it looks a little bit enticing given that he was 8.5 last year, so he's come down quite a lot. But the reason that he was 8.5 was because he got 200 points the season before, and the reason he's dropped to 7 is because he didn't live up to those expectations whatsoever. So is that a perfectly fair price? Absolutely. But am I going to spend 0.5 million more when I could just get like a Solly March or a Matoma for a Brighton side that create a lot of chances, very attacking? Probably not. So from an attacking point of view, Benrahma's on penalties, if he got a run of minutes, etc. and starts, could be good. But I don't think I'm really looking at any of those West Ham players, at least not straight away, maybe kind of after the fixtures are settled a little bit. With Brighton, different story. I am massively interested in them. Estepinian coming in at 5 million. Looks pretty good to me, right? 0.5 million less than the likes of Shaw, James and Chilwell. We know how attacking he can be. I can't remember exactly what game week it was last season, but in the last kind of 8 to 10 game weeks, he had that 18-pointer against Arsenal where he got a clean sheet, got the goal and the assist as well. Now, we don't have Lewis Dunk's price yet. He is another nailed-on defender in that Brighton team. I think he'll come in at 4.5. And I think if they were the same price, you'd absolutely go for Estepinian. I think most people, myself included, will just pay the 0.5 million more if Dunk is 4.5 because of the attacking kind of potential Estepinian has. But maybe, if the fixtures are right at some point, there could even be a double up to have there as well. So let's see what Lewis Dunk comes in at. March is the same price as Matoma, which makes sense. The player we don't have, that a lot of people have been talking about, is Evan Ferguson. Obviously still quite young, Ireland international. A lot big things are kind of expected from him. I'm sure he's going to get more minutes than he did last year, but they also have João Pedro now as well. So are minutes going to be shared kind of across that forward line? If they are, whether or not we can really go for a Welbeck or a Ferguson, who'll probably be 6 million as well, doesn't look kind of likely straight away. but who knows? Again, there is definitely some value to be had with Brighton. And don't completely write off Pascal Gross. McAllister has gone now, so Gross will probably be the penalty taker. He takes a lot of set pieces too, and as long as he's not playing right back, who knows? He might even get forward as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on him pre-season, kind of what position and what role he's kind of taken up. But he will probably take all of their set pieces. So Brighton definitely interesting. I want to see the likes of kind of Lewis Dunk, Evan Ferguson's price as well, but I would expect to have at least one or two of their players in my Game Week 1 squad. All right, let's end with Fulham and Nottingham Forest. And I think when we've just seen Estupiñán priced at 5 million, and I'm expecting Dunk to come in at 4.5, and Botman is 4.5 as well, it's very hard to justify Fulham defenders. It's not necessarily that they're priced incorrectly. It's just that those other players I've mentioned should probably be a little bit more expensive. So we'll skip over Tete and Ream. And look, if you're going to go for a Fulham defensive option, it's probably going to be Leno in goal instead. Let's go straight to the attackers. So Mitrovic at 7.5 million, I think is just about fair enough. There are some people that think he should have been a little bit cheaper, maybe 7 million instead. There's obviously the penalties to think about as well. He did miss quite a few last season. I don't think he's going to have them taken off him. And when you combine that with, you know, good underlying numbers, expected goals, expected assists, you pretty much guarantee a start every single game with decent minutes as well. 7.5 million is probably fair, especially if you can start converting some of those penalties. So I think it's okay. I think he absolutely smashed it at the start of last season. If you could do that again, people would absolutely pay that price. But it's definitely a price point where you're going to have to think about it, and I think most people will go for someone who on paper looks a bit more exciting, like a Darwin Nunez or maybe an Nkunku instead, possibly even one of the Newcastle forwards as well. So we'll see about Mitrovic. His ownership is definitely not going to be as high as it kind of hit points last season. In terms of Andreas Pereira, he was second in line for penalties last year, so if Mitrovic is going to lose them, maybe he would then become first choice. But I think that's a little bit of a stretch at this point. Given the points he got, the amount of games he played, the positions he took up, 5.5 million is absolutely fair. Is he going to get into our midfield straight away? Almost certainly not. If you think about the amount of midfielders' prices that have been released so far, there's absolutely like 4 to 5 of them that I want in my team. So finding a position for Pereira is probably not going to happen. But if you start trying to fit in like Haaland and Salah and Trent, some of you might want the likes of Kane as well, or Son, Fernandes, Odegaard, all these fairly expensive or expensive players. At some point you might have to kind of sacrifice a position somewhere. If that's midfield, is Andreas Pereira 5.5 million the worst option? Possibly not, but let's see who else kind of gets released once the game is actually out. In terms of Nottingham Forest, I don't think their fixtures are great to start the season, so I don't have a huge amount of interest to start off in game week 1, but two of those prices are interesting. So Awani is 6.5 million. He comes in 1 million less than Mitrovic. Now, we didn't have the greatest season last year, and he was injured for quite a bit as well. But if you look at the back end of last season, especially the last 4 matches, he got 6 goals. So it was 2 against Southampton, 2 against Chelsea, 1 against Arsenal, 1 against Palace, and 2 game weeks before that he also got an assist against Brighton as well. Now, I'm obviously not expecting him to get 6 goals every 4 game weeks, but I think he did start to show the quality that he has. So at some point he might be an option, and I think given that so many of the other forwards have come in at 7.5 or above, that might be pretty decent for 6.5. And Brennan Johnson's been listed as a midfielder, so that's something to note as well. 6 million probably on penalties. Gibbs White could take them as well. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But also there has been some rumours that Brentford have tried to buy Brennan Johnson. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. I think obviously Nottingham Forest would want to keep hold of him, but if he goes to another club and gets regular minutes, maybe in a better team like Brentford, who will be a bit more attacking, don't have Ivan Toney because obviously he's suspended for a lot of the season, then 6 million for Johnson at some point could be pretty nice. Am I going to start with any Nottingham Forest players? Probably not, but Johnson and Awani's prices are potentially at some point fairly good. Again, with any price reveals, don't get too locked into which players you're definitely going to have, definitely not going to have, because everything will be dictated by everyone else's prices, right? Yesterday, Bruno Fernandes was one of the, I think he was the first player along with Odegaard to be announced in terms of prices. Too cheap, definitely going to have him. all of a sudden Rashford's only 0.5 million more. Sterling's come in at 7 million. Bowen's only 7 million as well. Haaland's 14 and Trent's 8. So they're going to take up a lot of your budget. Things can change quite rapidly. So I do think in general FPL pricing over the years has started to come down. Most of the players they released are still generously priced. I think Trent is correct. I think Haaland is correct as well. Salah probably too. Outside of that, most other players are probably slightly on the cheaper side rather than the expensive, which is why it's always hard to kind of put in players like Johnson, Nawani, Mitrovic and Pereira. But you never know. At some point it might work out. Anyway, I'll leave that video there. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I will be back tomorrow, either with another price reveals video, but hopefully the game will launch. When it does, there'll be a live stream straight away, just kind of initial reactions, see if there's any changes to the rules, what other players' prices and stuff like that, and then we'll have a first draft video and then all the other content that comes throughout pre-season. So thank you very much for watching, give it a like, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon, hopefully with the FPL launch.